Welcome to Discover Indie Film. I'm Jeff Howard, and I have filmmaker Clarke Wolfe with me. Hey, Clarke.
Hi, Jeff.
Good to have you here. We just had a great conversation.
Yeah.
The podcast before this one is Clarke's Discover Indie Film interview. You can learn all about Clarke and your work, particularly A Shining Example, which is the film that I've seen. Although I want to see the one before.
I'll send it to you.
It'd be fun.
It's on YouTube.
I get it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have an affinity for iPhone shot film.
Yeah.
I feel like there's
Simple.
something immediate about it.
Yeah. It was fun.
Oh, you want to share the title? I don't know.
Oh, yes. It's called Say Something.
Say Something.
And you can find it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/official.
There you go. It'll be one of the clickable links.
Ooh.
But A Shining Example, which people will be able to see soon, but that was the one that was at Sherman Oaks Film Festival just 2 months, just to this is February. So yeah, 2 months ago,
Yeah.
beginning of December, where it took home the Filmmakers Award for Outstanding Writing in a Horror Film. That went to you, Clarke Wolfe, and your co-writer, Dylan Guerra. And you also got the Programmer's Prize for Exceptional Filmmaking, because it's freaking exceptional. So anyway, that is why you're here. And the podcast before this one learned all about your life and what got you into the creative pursuits and how you ended up on screen and behind the camera. But this podcast is not about that. This is the 4 questions, the Discover Indie Film 4 questions, which are: name 3 favorite films, name an underrated film, name an overrated film, and name a lesser-known film for people to seek out. And honestly, it's just a fun way to inspire. I intentionally made it like people started trying to make it like the best 3 films ever made.
No.
And that's why I changed it to the word favorite.
Yep.
Because Lord knows, you can't limit it to 3.
Very, very important distinction to make, I think.
Yeah.
Best and favorite are not necessarily the same thing.
No, in fact, I love some... I almost wanted to have the guilty pleasure question, but I was like, no, it's got to be 4, and I didn't want to replace lesser known.
Yeah. That's good.
You got to have under and over.
Yeah.
Because you got to have the shit talking. But anyhow, you want to just jump in with some favorites?
Sure. And you'll know your audience will notice that I've mentioned quite a lot of them actually on our previous episode. So that's a fun little throwback. Or if you haven't listened to,
I know I can name one of them.
Okay.
I know I can name 2. I bet.
What do you think they are?
Wizard of Oz. Back to the Future.
Those are, so of course I could not narrow it down to 3. So I actually wrote 2 for each category for me. So Wizard of Oz, of course, / Labyrinth. Those 2 kind of jockey for me about my favorite movie ever. But they're also the same movie. Little girl is lost in a strange land. She meets some friends, goes on a musical adventure, and then goes home.
Well, see, for me, as a lifelong Bowie fan, Labyrinth is just yeah, but go on.
So that's sort of my fantasy kind of choice. But for comedy, I have on here Billy Wilder's The Apartment, just one of my favorite movies ever. And I watch it every Christmas, in between Christmas and New Year's, because it is a Christmas New Year's movie. And I love it because, I love my traditional Christmas movies like Elf, and Scrooged is my favorite. And It's a Wonderful Life. I love the Die Hard. I love the classics. But The Apartment, to me, captures the melancholy of the holidays like nothing else. And yet it is so funny. It's still funny to this, and I'm a huge Billy Wilder fan, but I love The Apartment. So that's on there.
I love that that's on there, and I love Some Like It Hot and other stuff.
Sure.
But I love that you're pulling out The Apartment, because I remember seeing it a long time ago. That's Jack Lemmon,
yes,
yeah?
and Shirley MacLaine.
Unbelievably funny.
And it's also so modern. If you watch it now, the conversations they're having about relationships and love triangles and affairs and men and women and those dynamics, they are still totally, and transactional relationships, totally contemporary in so many ways. And then my third that I'll pick is I'll pick Scream. Scream, because I got to represent horror. And, I have Scream / The Exorcist, very different movies, obviously, but very instrumental in my worldview. But I'll pick Scream because I think that just every time I watch that movie, I pick up more in the script. Kevin Williamson's script, I think, it's just fabulous. And considering he is just this young guy, like writing, it just is crazy, just comes out of the gate and changes everything. And as I mentioned on our last conversation, on the last episode of the podcast, I love Wes Craven, and Wes begrudgingly taking this project on, but also really solidifying his voice and changing. Like, it's amazing how when you think about in the 1970s, Wes Craven makes Last House on the Left, this really in-your-face, polarizing exploitation film that has a lot to say. In the 1980s, he makes A Nightmare on Elm Street and changes everything. And then in the 1990s, he makes Scream and he changes everything. It's just absolutely wild. So those are three of my favorites.
Excellent. Well, I'm just going to count it as 6. There's nothing wrong.
I know.
You're allowed to do 6, and The Exorcist is a great one to add. But Scream really is, unfortunately, like, people do that poorly all the time, but it might be the best self-aware horror film ever.
Yes.
It's so well done, and it is one of those ones where it's a perfect script.
And it trusts the audience. I mean, just does not talk down to the audience, trusts the audience. And I mean, truly, I could go on and on about that one. But yeah, I agree. Just like it's the best to do it, the self-referential meta. But I think that just comes from it being like, no, the audience is smart and we are smart. So let's be smart together.
Yeah. And it's balanced and it actually does have humor.
So funny.
And yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I know. I didn't say it during your interview, but I love nothing more than the marriage of horror and comedy.
Same.
because it's just involuntary reactions. You can't fake a laugh and you can't fake a scare.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, question number 2 is a film that you feel is underrated.
So again, I wrote a bunch of different things down, but the one I'll go with is something I mentioned in the last one. It's a huge movie. Actually, a lot of the movies that I wrote down are big movies. But I think that when you make a big movie successfully, it's very easy to just go, oh, yeah, sure. Like, that was easy. But if it were easy, everyone would do it. For me, James Wan's The Conjuring, 2013, I think that's his masterpiece. But I think that is just a movie that is so classic. So the story behind The Conjuring is that it got an R rating. And the producers at New Line were like, what do you mean? There's no violence. There's no gore. There's no sex. And there's no language. And the studio, or in the MPAA, said, it's just too scary. And they were like, what can we do to get this down to a PG-13? And the MPAA said, probably nothing. And so they released it as an R-rated movie. And it was one of the most successful R-rated movies, of all time. But I think that it is such expert craft. Like, James has a little bit of a connotation because of Saw, or maybe because they see Insidious and like the demons or whatever, and they go, or Aquaman, and they don't really know what James does. But to me, The Conjuring is sort of playing in the haunting sort of sandbox, in that it's what you don't see. He is actually being so restrained, and so much of the scares in The Conjuring are tone and performance-based and looking into darkness. And again, James is a very big filmmaker, right? He doesn't leave much to the imagination, but in this movie, it's so restrained. And you mentioned earlier about possession movies, and I feel like we've seen a million. And to be fair, The Conjuring, I love James Wan, and I do like the franchise, but they have gotten into this religious superhero kind of thing that I feel like does stray from the original film. But that said, one of the best exorcism possession scenes at the end of this movie, and he does it with the victim covered in a sheet. And yet, it is terrifying. And that is craft. That is craft. But it's easy to write it off because it's James Wan and it's a horror movie, and it made a lot of money, and now it's $1 billion franchise. So to me, that's my underrated pick.
Absolutely, because as cinema, well, needless to say, James Wan is a long way away from getting recognized with an Oscar.
Agreed.
And
yes.
Yet you were pointing out that the filmmaking techniques being used by James Wan
Yes.
are the same as being used by Denis Villeneuve, who
Yes.
I also think is brilliant.
Agreed.
But, yeah, why can't the person working in the fun genre... By the way, I think it's probably harder to scare the shit out of people because The Conjuring really is so fucking scary.
It's just so well crafted. It just, to me, that word is craft. I keep coming back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I can keep them separate now. For the longest time, I would like blur Insidious and Conjuring.
Yeah, sure.
Because Patrick Wilson's in both.
Yes, for sure.
And I don't know why Juan did that, but I guess
They love each
he
other.
went with his best actor.
They
yeah.
love working together.
But yeah, that's the one with Vera Farmiga.
Yes, correct.
It's so good.
Yeah, I love that first
That
one.
basement is so. I'm like, wait, can we nuke that house, please?
Oh my God, hide and clap, the possession scene, the whole deal. It's great. It's really good.
It is. I support. I back you up.
Thank you.
All right, now here comes a fun one. I don't know if you're such a nice person. I'm not going to give you the disclaimer about overrated. I'm just going to let you run with it.
Well, yes, I do have a policy. I try really hard to not say negative things about film and television because we all know how hard it is to make a movie. But I will make an exception here, and it's just overrated doesn't mean bad.
Those are my words.
Yes, overrated doesn't mean bad. Overrated just means, okay, maybe it's... And I'm going to say The Shining. That my movie is based on. This is because, again, what scares you is so deeply personal, and I understand that. But look, the movie is a phenomenon. But at the same time, I think it is overrated. But I also think Jack Nicholson is giving a performance that is so entertaining. It is so entertaining. But I do think Kubrick gets away with a lot of inconsistency because a lot of cinephiles build a mystery around him. And, good for that. Good for him, I suppose. But when I made a shining example as a cinephile and someone who went to film school, you are taught these are the pinnacle movies of cinema, and The Shining often is represented as one of the pinnacles of genre. And I kind of was like, okay, but I have some things to say about this, and so that is sort of the impetus of, in many ways, of The Shining example.
I back you up 100%. I will just come out of the. I'll just come out with the fact that I never got The Shining.
Yeah.
And I think it just gets the credit it does because this great filmmaker he put his little toe in the horror genre, but he's not a horror. He doesn't appreciate horror. And he just I don't like it.
Yeah.
I admit I don't like it.
Yeah.
I've never liked it.
Yep.
I never got it.
Yep.
I never found it scary, and I never found it entertaining.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't get it. And I most of his films I think are brilliant. But yeah, just because this big shot Oscar winner dipped his toe in the horror world, Hollywood goes, oh, this is the best horror film ever made. Bull fucking shit.
It's also just intentional. That's the place that I've come down on The Shining, is that everything that Kubrick set out to do, he did with that movie. Meaning, I think he wants you to hate Danny and Wendy. And when I realized that, I started to appreciate the film more. He wants you to be on Jack's side, but also he wants you to be afraid of Jack. And so when you look at that, and he wants you to be disoriented, and he wants you to be confused, and it is resting a little bit on that auteur, those laurels, right? But yes, so I've come to appreciate it over the years, if from the perspective of Stanley Kubrick accomplished what he set out to do.
And he certainly did.
He did.
And he made a lot of people happy at the studio.
But not Stephen King, famously.
No. Has it been remade like as a series or something?
Yeah, in the 90s, Mick Garris remade it with Steven Weber. But,
I remember that.
And it was a more faithful adaptation, but...
Weber might have been a bad choice, though.
I actually,
he's so funny.
He is funny. He's a great actor. I love the idea of Steven in that part. However, I just don't think that all the pieces lined up. for that. And so I wouldn't necessarily point anyone in that direction. But Mike Flanagan, of course, did Dr. Sleep and did a beautiful job of adapting Stephen King's novel Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining, while also blending it with Kubrick's iconography and big story changes that Kubrick made. And what Mike was able to accomplish was truly like, my hat is off. So that's the and we allegedly were for a while we're going to get an Overlook prequel series, which I still think is a wonderful idea, and I hope someone does it someday.
Excellent. Yeah, I know Stephen King. Pretty fertile ground for adaptations, I would say.
Very much.
But the more faithful they are, the better they are.
It depends. It
I don't know.
depends.
That's my side. All right. So the last one.
Yes.
Is a lesser known that people should seek out.
Okay. So there is a movie that came out last year called Strange Darling. If you are an indie filmmaker or an indie film fan, I would highly recommend just watching it. Willa Fitzgerald and Kyle Gallner just giving incredible performances, director and writer J.T. Molnar. And I got to see the world premiere of this movie actually at Fantastic Fest in 2023. And it started off on a weird foot for me. I was like, I'm not going to like this. And then 15, 20 minutes in, I was like, oh, let's go. And it was my favorite thing I saw at the festival that year. It finally came out last year, and the people who saw it, I think, really liked it. It might have been a victim of the hype machine, but I think that if you're into indie cinema, just don't look at anything about it. Just watch it. Just watch it. And same goes with my other one, which I have to do, is Neil Marshall's The Descent.
Oh, I missed it.
Well, again, another one. Do not learn anything about it. Just watch it. I did an episode of the podcast. It's called Podcast Like It's. And we did an episode on The Descent for their Halloween episode last year. And I sincerely believe that the craft, speaking of the craft, like the craft that went into that movie, I think it's one of the best films. I think it is just seriously one of the best British films ever made. Horror films ever made, and one of the best horror films ever made. Forget where it came from. Neil, has had a really wonderful career in television and is now starting to make more indie films. So, but yeah, The Descent is one that it's not. I feel comfortable recommending it to a cinephile, whether you like horror or not. It is, it's a horror movie, but I think it's excellent.
I've heard nothing but good things about it since it came out. I remember when it was in theaters and it looked engaging, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Both
Thank you for that
You're
reminder.
welcome.
As you saw, I typed them both titles into. We all have that list on our phones.
Yes, we do.
And I'm like, I got to get it on there in time. All right. Well, I will wrap us up.
Thank you.
Because I know you got to get going. So thank you for being so generous with your time.
Thank you.
And I will point out that, yes, there will be clickable links in the show notes for Clarke Wolfe and all her websites and social media and connections, and you should follow her and her work. So, thank you for listening to the Discovery Indie Film Podcast. Like and subscribe. Be nice. I often share this joke once per podcast, which is there's been more guests on this podcast than there are reviews. Which I guess is, but I think by the way, you're going to be in the 500s.
Whoa!
Episode 500 is going to be passed in like 2 weeks.
Okay.
I know. And I am wondering if I should, I've had people say to me, actually, number 100 was supposed to be a filmmaker asking me to answer the 4 questions, and we never got it together. So actually, this podcast goes from 99 to 101. The question is, do I do that with number 500?
To be determined.
To be determined. Actually, you have experience as an
I
interviewer.
do. I can ask you those questions.
I might take you up on
Let's
that.
Let's do it.
All right, so that's Discover Indie Film. Learn more if you go to discoverindiefilm.com or at DIFWins on social media. Clarke's film, A Shining Example, took home a couple of awards at the Sherman Oaks Film Festival. You can learn about that festival at ShermanOaksFF.com, and it's at ShermanOaksFF on social media. And the 10th anniversary is this December. And the 10th anniversary of Film Invasion Los Angeles, Sherman Oaks' sister festival, is this June. So you can learn about that one at filminvasionla.com, and it's at filminvasionla on social media. And finally, if you love indie film, check out indiechannel.tv. Why not? Go for it. I won't say any more. Clarke, thank you so much.
Thank you again.
You have excellent taste.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.